Mr. Griffin.
Mr. Cobbins. Ms. Cox.
Here.
Ms. Hartgrove. Mr. Holt.
Here.
Mr. Smith.
Mr. Smith is Mr. Gentile now.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gentile.
Here.
Mr. Jensen.
Here.
Ms. McInturf.
Here.
Mr. Mollenauer. Mr. Mollenauer. Mr. Morrow. Mr. Morrow. Mr. Wells.
Here.
Mr. Chairman.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have 7 members present, 6 voting members.
I then declare that a quorum is present and we are duly convened. Before we start this meeting, I'd like to welcome a few people. First, our new student member, Laurel Cox. I think this may be your first official meeting, and we welcome you here. And as I said before, your perspective is so important to us, a perspective that the rest of us don't have, coming and representing the student bodies across the state of Tennessee. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And also we have a new THEC interim director in Stephen Gentile. And I know he's working back to get onto the video, but I believe he's on by phone. And Stephen, welcome very much. The collaboration that the state board has with THEC is so important as we go forward in doing what's best for our students. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be with you guys today. I thoroughly enjoy our collaboration and look forward to joining by camera here in a few minutes.
Thank you. And we're always very pleased to welcome our Commissioner Reynolds. And again, the collaboration that we have with the department is just so important. And thank you for participating. With that, I'll ask Dr. Morrison if she has any opening comments.
Thank you, Chairman Eby. I really don't. I just echo your welcome to everyone. And I should say on the outset, Laurel, we will miss you at our next meeting, but I want everyone on this call and who's watching to know you're going to be at the, I believe, National FFA Convention. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
So we are excited and just proud of you for representing Tennessee in that way. And so glad to have you today, and we'll miss you in November. But no other comments. Thank you, Chairman Eby.
With that, I will ask our General Counsel, Angie Sanders, to read a letter of necessity.
Thank you, Chairman. Pursuant to Tennessee Code Annotated Section 844-108B3, the State Board of Education submits this determination of necessity for its special call board meeting held via WebEx at 1 p.m. on October 6, 2023. This meeting was called to consider a time-sensitive approval of annual measurable objectives for the 2023-24 school year, in addition to receiving an update on the Department of Education's proposed revisions to the A through F school grading system. Due to the time-sensitive nature of these issues, and because state board members reside across the state, it was determined that a physical quorum of our members could not be assembled in Nashville for purposes of this special called meeting, and as such, that this meeting should be conducted electronically. Notice of this meeting was posted on the State Board of Education's website, along with the agenda and instructions for the public to access this meeting. With that, Chairman, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanders. Before we get into the work today, I want to be sure that we have each member. Also want to remind presenters to identify themselves, their title, and their position for the record, and then when presenting also as well define any acronyms used. With that, we'll go to our first item on the agenda, which is our consent item, and I will speak first that what we would like to do, I think, is reorder, if I can have a motion, is reorder the agenda so that we have our motion with regard to activity voting motion, first reading and final reading on the AMOs to come before we have a report. Do I have a motion to do that?
So moved. Mr. Jensen.
Mr. Jensen moves. Mr. Holt, did I see you seconding it?
Second. Yes, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you. Any further discussion on changing the consent agenda just to rotate those two items? If none, because this is a virtual meeting, all votes have to be done by roll call. Mr. Griffin, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins,
Aye.
Ms. Cox,
Aye.
Ms. Hartgrove, Mr. Holt,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. McInturf,
Aye.
Mr. Mullenhour,
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Mr. Wells. Aye. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 8 ayes.
That motion passes. And before we go to the next thing, I should have let it officially be known that Ms. Hartgrove and Mr. Morrow are excused from this meeting. With that, then the first item on the agenda is our action items, first reading and final reading. This is 2022-2023 annual performance goals, annual measurable objectives. And I think Mr. David Laird of the Department of Education will present that. Mr. Laird.
Thank you so much, Chairman Amy, members of the board. I am David Laird, Assistant Commissioner for Assessment and Accountability, and I am presenting the 22-23 annual performance goals, are also known as annual measurable objectives, or AMOs, for first and final reading for the board. TCA 49-1-602 requires the state board, in conjunction with the Commissioner of Education, to establish appropriate goals and measures for schools and districts. AMOs are personalized targets set for each school based on prior year performance that help evaluate recent performance and prioritize future efforts. AMOs are applied to a variety of indicators in the accountability system, including achievement, chronically out of school, English language proficiency assessments, graduation rate, and the Ready Graduate Indicator. In our federal accountability system, schools are recognized for the extent to which they approach, exceed, or far exceed their AMOs. As the board is well aware, a series of compliance findings served by the U.S. Department of Education has forced Tennessee to adjust a number of the underlying indicators upon which our AMOs are calculated, and resulted in a significant delay in finalizing and presenting these AMOs. I will now summarize the final of adjustments to the underlying data that are stipulated in our now approved ESSA amendment. I take a small consolation from the fact that the final adjustments are in fact consistent with those that we've been discussing with the board for just shy of a year. And they are as follows. I would say in order of significance. There's been a substantial adjustment to the achievement indicator, and by extension, the AMO that's used to evaluate it. Historically, for high schools, the success rate or achievement indicator was evaluated on all TCAP assessments administered at high school within a year. This version of AMOs is calculated on a very different set of high school assessments. The AMO is constrained to just one test of ELA and math. We ultimately settled on Algebra 1 or Integrated 1, depending upon whichever was offered in that district, and English 2. Additionally, these results are now reported in a cohort format. So for 22-23, the results that we will ultimately submit are based on all of the students that were functionally in 10th grade at that time, and we're reporting the Algebra 1 and English 2 test whenever it may have been assessed. So for the vast majority of those students, it'll be evaluated for the English 2 test they took as 10th graders, though it may actually be based on the Algebra 1 test that they took as 9th graders in the 21-22 school year. There are a couple of exemptions to this rule to how the cohorting works that I've discussed at prior sessions. I'm not going to bother to reiterate those, but if anyone would like me to go back through that, I'm more than happy to do so. The next most significant adjustment to how these AMOs will be calculated in compliance with federal regulation is a change to graduation rate. Previously, the department was served with a finding that essentially said we could not count a child as a graduate if they received a regular diploma without completing all of the same coursework as other students that receive a regular diploma. We here in Tennessee have a state board approved pathway for students with disabilities to receive a regular diploma without having taken a number of advanced courses, most prominently being Algebra 2. So these students simply are not allowed to be counted in the federally reported graduation rate, and this version of AMOs reflects that adjustment. The last adjustment that I will flag here is, I think, a very minor change to one of the subcomponents of how the AMOs are produced. There was a prior compliance finding that drew concern or raised concern about a component of our methodology for creating essentially partial credit. We evaluate these indicators on a 0 to 4 scale. To earn 2 points on the scale, you have to at least meet your AMO or exceed it. And we had a prior mechanic for creating cut scores to distinguish between no points and 1 point and 1 point and 2 points. Previously, that methodology was based on a confidence interval or an upper or lower boundary that was created around the AMO that was dependent upon essentially the amount of data that existed. It was an error band. And so the fractional points were awarded as to whether or not you met or exceeded the lower boundary of that error band. The core of US Ed's concern, the compliance finding that we served with, is that we were using error bands for indicators that were functionally not estimates. And so they specifically flagged graduation rate and chronic absenteeism as two indicators that in fact aren't estimates, right? We know if every child is a graduate or is not a graduate. And so they functionally directed the department to discontinue the use of the confidence interval. The department's approach to solving this problem was to come up with an alternative method that caused minimal disruption. We wanted to prize continuity in how we undertook this component of the AMO calculation, and we arrived at a solution where instead of using the confidence interval, we use a fraction of the AMO. So the difference between 0 and 1 is, did you get within a 0.75 or 75% of your AMO? The difference between 1 and 2 is 0.25. We're very happy to report that we were able to reproduce almost identical performance goals using our fractional AMO methodology as opposed to the confidence interval methodology. And so that is the last change that I do have to share. Just a couple of additional points on this process. I did want to flag the fact that districts have had their annual opportunity to verify this data prior to the calculation of the AMOs. I also want to flag and express the department's gratitude for all the district staff that were involved in figuring out how to make sense and process this change in rule. The change to the achievement indicator in particular was enormously complex in terms of figuring out which students would now apply and which tests would be used. The department received more than twice its number of typical appeals, almost entirely as a result of trying to help districts figure out how to process these rules. But I'm enormously grateful for the work of districts across the state, and I'm enormously grateful for our staff for having processed all of those appeals appropriately and in a timely fashion. And so to sum up, the Department of Education recommends approval of this item on first and final read, and State Board staff concurs with that recommendation. And I'm now happy to take any additional questions as needed.
Thank you, Mr. Laird. Do we have questions for Mr. Laird? I've got a couple of questions. I really appreciate the explanation of the modified the fraction, because I didn't really totally understand that, but what you presented makes more sense. What I didn't hear though, have the feds then approved that new method for calculation?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. And the districts are fully aware, you've kept them apprised, it seems like, throughout the process. This has been a fairly lengthy process, and I appreciate everything that you've done and the department has done to keep the districts and us informed on the process. Other questions for Mr. Laird? If there are no other questions, we have a recommendation from the department, and consistent with the State Board staff, do I have a motion to accept the AMOs as presented?
This is Warren Wells.
So
I'll move it.
Mr. Wells, I heard move first. Who? Somebody was getting ready to. Daryl Cobbins,
Daryl.
second by Vice Chair Cobbins. Is there any further questions or comments? If not, then I'll ask Mr. Griffin to call the roll, please.
Mr. Cobbins,
Aye.
Ms. Cox,
Aye.
Chairman, Ms. Hargrove, Mr. Holt,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. McInturf,
Aye.
Mr. Mullenhour,
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Mr. Wells,
Aye.
Mr. Chairman,
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 8 ayes.
The motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Laird. The next item that we have on the agenda will be the report item. And let me just say this, is I know we've got a couple of board members who joined in the middle of some other activities. And if you need to go off camera for the report item, I encourage you to stay on and listen to it, but we fully understand if you need to go off camera for other activities. With that, I believe we're going to talk about Miss Chelsea Crawford's going to talk about the upcoming A through F past activities and what's going forward. Ms. Crawford.
Chairman, thank you very much for kicking it over to me. I know the department appreciates the opportunity to give you all an update today. I also know Commissioner Reynolds wants to provide just some framing remarks right here at the beginning before I go through the PowerPoint deck. So if it's all right with you, sir, we'll hear from Commissioner Reynolds just briefly and then proceed with the presentation.
Absolutely. Commissioner Reynolds, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman Eby and State Board of Education members. My name is Lizette Reynolds. I am the Commissioner of Education for the great state of Tennessee. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I know that some of you were able to be on the call that we held yesterday with our nearly 50 member stakeholder group to talk about the work that we've been doing around A through F. So pardon if this is a little bit of a repeat, but again, it's always best to hear more, particularly when it comes to an issue that will be generating questions from your constituents. So we want to be able to be here to support you and the communications that you have with the members of your communities as well. This issue is so important. It really is. It's really about thinking about how we can better identify and support schools across the state to do better by all of our students. And so this fall, for the very first time, we will be implementing the state law to create a letter grade rating system for schools. So back in 2016, the General Assembly passed a law, as many of y'all know, and we've had these discussions as well, to implement a naming process for how schools are doing with respect to their students and their achievement and their growth and in other areas of schoolwork. You'll hear more about the history of this law and the process. Thank you, Chelsea. But I did want to just share a little bit to you about why it's so critically important for us to be working in partnership with our stakeholders across the state. Implementation isn't easy. It never is. And it's really never easy when, for some people, the viewpoint of this process is not a positive perception. We are here to really try to work on, number one, a calculation that is going to take into consideration the good work that's happening in our schools, but also to identify where it's not happening and where we can be a better support at the department and in partnership with you so that we can support our school districts across the state. Because at the end of the day, what matters is our kids, right? And so, one of the reasons we passed this letter grade law is so that families could have a familiar and easy understand rating system of school performance. But after talking to some district directors, and particularly, we're not going to talk about the school report card, but this is all going to end up being on the school report card. it's also an opportunity for them to level set with their school boards, right? With the people that employ them, to help them better articulate and communicate the needs of their students so that they can find the supports within their communities and with the support of the department and our partnership with the state board to do better by every single one of our children. It's a very complex challenge, and we're going to do the absolute best we can to get it right, because at the end of the day, we do have a priority to ensure that all of our students are served in the best way. We believe this will be a very honest and transparent process with families and with each other about how we're doing. And so here's what we're hoping to accomplish with this calculation. First, we're going to produce the school ratings for schools that are clear and meaningful for families again, and for our communities who already have expectations for performance as represented by a letter grade. Goal 2 is recognize the accomplishments in the academic achievement, growth, and any other indicators that may be determined by our steering committee. And then goal 3 is to identify areas of need or opportunities for improvement to support planning and investments at the local level. And then also for us as a department to also think about opportunities that we can be of best support. The team is now going to take you through some of this information and some of the hearings and listenings that we had from the town halls. And that, again, I appreciate your participation, your continued questions, challenging us so that we can make sure we make the right decisions. But at the end of the day, this is going to be a collaborative process that we hope everybody can take back home and be proud of the opportunities that can await all their students. So thank you again for your time and your partnership, and I'm kicking it over to Chelsea.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for those opening remarks. And thank you again to Chairman Eby and to all the members of the State Board for allowing us an opportunity to come give you an update. I'm going to do just a little bit of screen share for us today so that we can follow along with the presentation. And I'm also going to do my best to pull up our video at the same time. And we'll look for someone to kind of confirm for me that you can see the slides on your end. Commissioner, I see your square there. Okay, great. So I'm going to go through this update for you all. Very excited to be able to kind of give you a sense of what has happened to date in terms of the department's implementation here, where we are at this moment in time, and what is left to be done before kind of full and complete implementation of the letter grade law. So the quick agenda for our update for this afternoon, we're going to talk about what that state law actually is, when it was passed, what it says, what it requires, what flexibility it may provide. We're going to talk a little bit about the department's approach as we are working to implement a law that was passed a number of years ago. We wanted to make sure that we were being very intentional as we move forward in our steps this year to, as the commissioner said, get it right. We recognize that this is going to be a very powerful tool for communication, for districts, for parents and families, elected officials, lots of other stakeholders across the state who want to support students and K-12 education. So we're going to talk a little bit about why we are approaching it in the way that we are. I'm going to give you a recap of the public engagement opportunities that have occurred already, the ones that are occurring currently, and kind of what remains in that process. We'll go through exactly what we heard in terms of public comment overview as we kind of went along those engagement opportunities. What did we hear from Tennesseans about their perspectives, their priorities for the letter grade system? Then we'll talk about next steps and leave some time for questions. So to get us started, just a quick overview of state law. We have talked several times with many of you on the board and others about kind of the history and the amount of time it has been actually since the General Assembly put this law on the books. It was way back in 2016, and the intent was to implement that law in the 17-18 school year. Of course, I know many of you in this call are familiar with some of the delays along the way that have prevented implementation of this law so far. And those can include some of the testing administration issues that we had in attempting to move Tennessee Ready online a number of years ago. Of course, in very recent history, we remember COVID-19, school closures, the many disruptions that created for students and their learning. But here we are in 2023, where we have had a year of very successful assessments. We have data that is no longer off limits in terms of inclusion in a rating system like this. And so it's time to implement. And as we approached that process and really reminded ourselves of just how long it has been since this law was passed, we wanted to make sure to go out into the community, out to Tennesseans, to remind them that yes, this is a state law. Yes, it is time for this to be implemented. Here's what it is intending to do, and here's how we want to move forward before we actually issue the letter grades for schools. The next slide is a lot of very small type on your screen. I recognize that this is a lot of words on one slide, but this is effectively the code that calls for the creation of a letter grade rating system for schools. And you can see on this slide that there's lots of words as it relates to kind of the data and utilization of data and accountability in rating systems like this. But actually the part of the law that sets out the requirements for the letter grade system is pretty brief and straightforward. It's very clear. What you see right up at the top, it says the Department of Education shall develop the letter grade system for us to move forward with assigning an A, B, C, D, or F letter grade to schools across the state. And it requires that we include a few things. First and foremost, you see right at the top, student performance on TCAP or end of course exams. That is our academic achievement measures. When we think about the Tennessee state academic standards that our teachers and others have set to ensure that we are expecting our students to have a rigorous education, what we expect our students to know in a particular subject matter area at a particular grade. We think about the kind of proficiency of students, how close they may be to proficiency, how much further ahead of expectations they may be. That's really the measure of academic achievement that you see there in AA. Second component that the law requires is student growth, indicated by the TVOS system, which is familiar, I think, to many of you, or other measures of student growth. And so as a contrast to the academic achievement measure, we know that there are students who are growing regardless of whether they are meeting kind of proficiency, whether they are meeting expectations towards academic achievement against those state standards. And we know that just as academic achievement and proficiency is critically important, growth is also a critically important indicator for our schools and districts, because it means no matter where the student may be, they are able to improve that student's outcomes and kind of get them a little bit closer to where we would hope that all of our students are performing. AC, it says other outcome indicators of student achievement that the department may find to be a reliable measure of student performance. And this is really where we have a little bit of flexibility and has been a strong point of our conversation in this implementation with Tennesseans about what else do we believe matters when we think about our values and what we have in terms of expectations for K-12 education. What other metrics, what other areas, priorities, values do we want to elevate? What could or should be included in the calculation alongside academic achievement, performance, and growth? It also, as you see here, tells us where to assign and publish that information, which is the state report card, a website I know that is very familiar to all on this call. It contains lots of rich data about our schools, about our districts, our students, our staff, the financial information that kind of goes into all of the schools and districts and how they are able to utilize that funding to support student outcomes. So in addition, that you will see on the state report card after we implement this is this letter grade system where you will see along each school page the rating system and where they fell in terms of an A, B, C, D, or F rating. You also see some information about when this letter grade system should have begun, when it was supposed to be implemented, and then the rest of the words on the slide will actually kind of point to some of those protections of data that essentially left data for certain years off limits for inclusion in a letter grade system. So that's an overview of the state law, kind of the timeline that we've had leading up to this moment since it was passed in 2016. Now we're going to talk a little bit about our department's approach to implementation when we are charged by law to create a letter grade rating system and generate a calculation in that way. How did we actually want to approach implementation this year? So on the next slide, you're going to see sort of a sort of pretty colorful ribbon on the right-hand side that's going to talk about our process. And on the left-hand side, you're going to see some goals that have really been a North Star for us here at the agency as we've thought about implementing this law. You heard the commissioner lay this out early in the meeting. We definitely want to ensure that this calculation, this rating system will produce ratings for schools that are clear and meaningful to families. Students bring home report cards that have an A, B, C, D, or F letter grade associated with their performance. And so we know parents and families have expectations and perceptions as it relates to performance indicated by a letter grade. We know that parents expect an A to mean excellence. A B and C and D and F also carry some expectations and assumptions when we think about parents and families who will consume this information and who are first and foremost the primary intended audience for this rating system. So we want to make sure that when we go through this process of implementation, develop the calculation that will produce the rating systems, that at the end of that kind of that formula or calculation, those ratings are going to make sense to parents and families and kind of match their expectations that they have for performance at a particular letter grade. We also want to make sure that we are recognizing within the calculation, within the letter grade rating system, the accomplishments and many of them hard-earned, hard-fought wins that our schools and districts and teachers and students and families have together achieved in terms of academic achievement, that first required component. In terms of growth, the second required component, and any of those other indicators that may be determined. We want to make sure that this letter grade system can actually recognize those accomplishments and those achievements. The third goal we also want to make sure is the identification of areas of need or opportunities for improvement. To the commissioner's points earlier, we want to make sure that we're providing kind of an honest assessment of school performance in an attempt to be able to come alongside our school and district leaders, our teachers, our students, and our families to support, improve student outcomes wherever that may need to occur. I think all of us on this call share the aspiration that all students are achieving excellence in every school every day. And we know that that's just not the reality for some of our students. And so we want to be intentional in identifying those areas for improvement, the opportunities where we can better support students, so that we can plan, so that we can invest at that local level and really be able to drive improved outcomes for all. When you look at the right-hand side of this slide, I mentioned the pretty colorful ribbon is kind of the process that we chose to undertake in terms of engaging the public ahead of the department's charge as required by state law to go develop a calculation that generates letter grades. And so the first step we wanted to do was engage with any Tennessean who wanted to be a part of this conversation. You know, education is a very important topic that our state has prioritized for a very long time. Education is a very personal issue when we think about our families and their children and the futures that those children will have, the futures that our state will have. And so we wanted to make sure to create broad opportunity for anyone to engage with us ahead of generating this letter grade system and that very powerful communication tool that we know those letter grades will end up being. So first and foremost, we created opportunity for anyone in any community to come out and talk with us in person. We did a series of town halls, and I'll show you kind of the schedule and where we went here in just a moment, but wanted to make sure to visit all of our 8 core regions across the state. In previous kind of engagements like this, we heard from communities, particularly in Memphis and Nashville, where our population is so dense, that they may need a little bit extra opportunity to engage. And so in total, we did 10 town halls, 1 for each core region, and an additional town hall for the city in Memphis and the city in Nashville. Alongside those public town halls and continuing today is an opportunity for public comment. It is an email address that we are keeping open for anyone and everyone to tell us how they feel, what they think, their priorities, their preferences as we go through and march towards implementation. We've seen a really good amount of public comment come through from lots of different stakeholders. We've seen our district and school leaders engage in public comment and send us emails with their preferences and priorities. We have seen teachers, we have seen school staff, elected officials, and most importantly, parents and the mamas and daddies and the guardians who are taking care of children every day. who have engaged with us and kind of given us their 2 cents. And it's been, I think, a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to solicit that kind of input from folks who may or may not always come to the table to provide this type of input, by creating a kind of electronic opportunity through that email account. We've seen emails come in the middle of the night, for example, and so really wanted to make sure that we were busting all barriers down for anyone who wanted to participate in this conversation to be able to. Where we are at this moment in time is actually that third bullet point there, the A through F working group. Some of you on this call actually participated in our first meeting yesterday, and all of you have been invited to participate. We encourage you to jump on those meetings and chime in to the fullest extent that you wish. But essentially, this working group is charged with reviewing the public comment that we have received thus far. What is it that Tennesseans have said about what they believe is important to include in the calculation, considering what the law requires and considering the flexibility that the law provides us? What is it that they believe is most important, and how do we take all of that input and actually develop a math formula, a calculation that will kind of all the data will flow through that calculation to generate the A, B, C, D, or F letter grade for a particular school. So we've had the first meeting. It was kind of an introduction to the task at hand and introduction to the other members of the working group. And we will have 4 additional meetings over the next couple of weeks to really dive deeply in those required components, such as achievement, such as growth, other indicators. And then really, how do we put it all together in terms of a calculation? How do we weight those components based on our values and what we believe needs to be true in this letter grade rating system? When the working group work concludes, of course, we will then be ready to fully implement this law, which will include publication of the calculation, that actual math formula, and publication of the letter grades that calculation generates. And so mentioning back to that state report card tool and website that we know is very familiar, we're going to be able to take on some work kind of on the back end to generate the data, move that with our vendor into the website space, test all of that, provide a preview window for our districts and schools, and really get ready for a full public launch of letter grades, that A, B, C, D, or F rating for schools in November.
Ms. Crawford, before we go on, let's just see if we have any questions at this point in time. I saw the presentation yesterday. I know it's pretty complete and all, but I wanted to give a chance to see if there were any board members that had questions before we move on.
Happy to do that. Thank you for flagging me.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
Ryan Holt.
Mr. Holt.
Chelsea, thank you so much for this. It's really helpful. I intended to attend yesterday, but then I got tied up with something and wasn't able to. I hope to attend the remaining sessions. Is there a working formula in progress at this point, or is it just the concepts that we are talking about, and then at some point those are going to be reduced to a formula?
Good question. And I'll answer that kind of in 2 ways. So, of course, this letter grade law was passed a number of years ago. At that point in time, there was no indication that there would be a delay, such as a testing challenge or a global pandemic. And so there was an original calculation that was developed that included a number of things that we'll show you here in just a minute. We've actually taken that out to the public in those town halls, but there was an original calculation that was developed. Now, as we are moving through this engagement process, have we at the department kind of predetermined what we would like to see differently from that original calculation? No. We know that the law requires inclusion of academic achievement and growth and other indicators. We've got some opportunity to kind of consider how those things are weighted or prioritized within the calculation. So while we will ensure compliance with the letter of the law to the extent of what is required and where we've got some flexibility, we are really looking towards public comment and the deliberations, if you will, of the working group to help inform the calculation, that math formula that I mentioned. And so this is really kind of the part of the implementation where the sausage can be made, so to speak. And we're going to be looking very intentionally at each of those components of the calculation. We indicated to folks on the meeting yesterday that, if you need resource as a working group member, if you want to see kind of models from other states, best practices, data modeling to kind of pressure test the things that we are discussing in the working group, we want to be able to provide that along the way and really support as informed decision making, so to speak, those kind of preferences and priorities amongst the working group members as we can. So not developed in terms of implementing for November.
Let me also go ahead, Mr. Holt.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chelsea, when would you anticipate that there would be at least a working formula that can then, because I think that we all agree achievement's important and growth's important and some of these other factors are important, and the rubber hits the road with weighting them, I would think.
Yes.
And certainly some things that are in or out, but weighting of growth and achievement. And when would you anticipate that there would be not a final formula, but a formula that can then kind of focus the discussion onto going from the concepts to the math?
Yes, sir. So final formula will come at the end of the working group meetings. Their last meeting is set to occur on October 20th, Friday. And that's the kind of final pin in the conversation, which is the weighting component. We'll talk next week about achievement and growth, the following week about other indicators and the weighting and kind of putting it all together. And so on the heels of that working group, really deliberating and kind of identifying what of public comment makes sense to go into that calculation, what of public comment doesn't quite make sense to go into that calculation, how do we prioritize? The department will publish kind of the final form calculation so that we've got transparency along that step. And so we'll just kind of let the working groups deliberate over the next couple of weeks in very intentional, deep conversations, develop the calculation, and then actually move into the space where we're using that calculation and running data through it to begin to generate those letter grades ahead of publication on the state report card in November.
Great, thank you. As a part of that iterative process, is it possible to run the numbers for the past year or two or some time period with our state's actual data and see what the outcomes would be for certain schools? Not that we want to prejudge and say we want a formula that results in these schools getting these certain letter grades, but just I think that there could be some reality check if you run it through and then see, okay, how does this compare to what we would have expected for particular schools?
Yes, sir. That is absolutely possible. It is something we have looked at, and the reality check comment I think is particularly poignant just in terms of my reaction to your question. I mean, ahead of implementing this law, we really did want to look at what we were expecting to see, right? And so we did do some modeling on previous years of data, even those years where we would have never been able to actually implement the letter grade system because of those protections in the law. And I think what we found on the required components like academic achievement and growth, that the original calculation was not developing or generating letter grades that were meaningfully different from each other. And so when you think about kind of the idea of a cutoff, where does an A fall, where does a B fall versus C, D, and F, we saw that the original calculation was generating lots of overlaps. For example, a B school may have a TVOS score of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. A B school could have academic achievement rates anywhere from 8% to 98%. And so there was a lot of overlap in terms of the actual data, the actual performance as represented by a single letter grade, such that it did not become a meaningful rating system for parents. When you think about the, kind of the full spectrum of performance on any particular indicator, A was pretty broad, B was pretty broad, C was pretty broad. And so the ratings actually did not meaningfully differentiate performance in any of the sub-indicators that we looked at as was laid out in that original calculation. So we'd be happy to share that kind of information with you. And we will, just provide the caveats that, of course, when we look backwards in time, there are data and years of data that would have never been possible to run because the law said no. However, we did identify that there was that reality check moment and that this rating system needs to be clear and meaningful for families. A needs to represent something that's meaningfully different from a D or a F, for example.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Let me also say this. I want to make sure for the record that people understand this is a department activity. The state board, really, we don't have a vote on this. That's one reason that with regard to the working groups that you have, that we have board members who are in that working group. Encourage all board members to participate. So it can't, I actually asked our counsel, Angie Sanders, if there was any issue with more than one board member participating so that we didn't get into quote deliberation. But since we don't have a vote, this is our opportunity also to provide our input. Meetings like this that we have right now, but the working group is another opportunity to provide input. I know I've gotten received several comments from my constituents, and we'll be passing those comments on. And certainly the questions that Mr. Holt asked, I think, are very valid questions. And each board member I would encourage to be engaged. This is our opportunity to be engaged and ask the questions that we want to ask to assure this thing goes, that we have input into it. So.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for that clarification, Chairman. We are excited to be able to engage as many of you who want to come and play ball with us as much as possible. We genuinely want to have your engagement and kind of help us co-create the solution along with a lot of other stakeholders in Tennessee.
Mr. Holt, did you have another
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Holt.
A quick follow-up. Chelsea, just on the timeline, and thank you for all that very helpful explanation. And I understand that the state board does not have a vote on the A through F criteria. Is this going to be presented to the state board again when the formula has been, at least there's some sort of formula to talk about, or?
Absolutely.
You nod yes.
Yeah.
And when would we anticipate that occurring?
So I mentioned kind of the working groups will conclude on October 20th, and that will kind of be the real process that determines the calculation. I know you all have a workshop opportunity and a meeting early in November. I think it's the 2nd and the 3rd, or the 3rd and 4th. I don't have a calendar in front of me, but it's that first week in November. We would welcome an invitation to provide an update there. Any kind of questions that you all have at any point along the way. I have an interest in making sure you all feel good and updated on what is happening, that you have clear answers to questions that may come up, and be able to support you all in this process. I also want to make sure, and I think our agency wants to make sure, that you all will be fully kind of prepared for not just the publication of the calculation, but the publication of the letter grades. When that kind of goes up and goes live on the state report card, it'll generate lots of different types of conversation that may look different, sir, in your area versus another board member's area. And even within a particular school district, there may be some differences that we see in terms of performance from school to school. And so I want to make sure that you have the information you need to be able to engage in those conversations, as well as kind of thinking about what is the next step. When we think about federal accountability systems, a lot of times a rating system may come with additional supports or additional requirements. This law in and of itself does not require additional planning or funding or resource for schools that may be struggling in terms of serving all of their students to the extent that they would like to. And so we've had really intentional conversations about what can we as an agency do to kind of come alongside with our schools and districts to support them in the after publication of school letter grades. We want to make sure that you as board members are prepared to do that to the extent that you want to be engaged there.
Did I hear Ms. McInturf had a comment, or somebody?
Yes. Christy McInturf, member, District 1. I was wondering, in a perfect world, would every school be able to be an A, or is that more of a bell curve situation? I just want more clarification with that. Or is that something that would be part of those working groups where we decide how we make that formula work?
Number 3, yes, ma'am. We've had those kind of questions come along the way in public town halls, and even just in conversations with some of the board members here. It's kind of the notion of an absolute bar or expectation versus kind of the relative bar or expectation. And that is absolutely some of the things that we will be talking about with the working groups. As an example, on Tuesday, we're getting into that kind of first required component, which is academic achievement. And that is one of the prompts, which is, do we want to look at a very absolute kind of static bar expectation for performance, or do we want that kind of to be a relative thing? And so number 3 is the answer to your question, but we look forward to engaging with the working group members to deliberate there.
But Chrissy, as much as I would love to say that is possible, I don't think it is. And I would say that it would be a mistake to guarantee anything, right? That's part of this process, is like, we really want to know what is going on, because it also could be just certain subgroup needs. It could be other struggling needs. Part of this is also to inform the work and the future of the work that can happen. So, while I would love to under our tenure to see every single district be an A in this state, I think that's I think that's part of the rubber meeting the road a little bit. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Let me ask another question with regard to the timing, because I think you said the intent is to have these grades out mid to late November or some point in time. And you also talked about our board meeting on the second, workshop on the second, and board meeting on the third. If we want to make input, and I think we do, and I think every board member has some good questions, and I say we've heard from the superintendents in our various cores, and I think they all have very valid comments. Are the working groups the best place for us to do that, to ensure that they get in a timely manner that impacts your decision point? Or will the board meeting on the second and third, will that, if we have comments at that time, will those comments be input into the final decision making?
Yes, sir. I'm happy to take that question. The working groups would be the best place to do it. And we've heard from members of this board, we've heard from members of the General Assembly, certainly our school districts. There are lots of folks who want to kind of make sure that they're able to kind of come to the table in this section of implementation to have their piece kind of heard and ensure that the calculation is going to achieve that goal to provide that meaningful rating system for families. And so the working groups, I think, would be the absolute best way to form and kind of help us mold some Play-Doh here in terms of a calculation. And as we kind of exit out of the working group space, we will have determined the calculation. And really the work at that point in time is for all of us at the agency to kind of go into our computers and our spreadsheets and our tools and our websites to get that ready to go live for the public. But certainly welcome and encourage you all to come alongside with us at those working groups.
And I think you have you sent all the board members the dates of those working group meetings?
Yes, sir. I believe so. We had a question yesterday from the working group about, can we go on and get all of the calendar invitations? And so I believe those are going out now if they have not already been delivered to you. But yes, sir, that is absolutely something we invite you to participate in. And at the end of this call, I'll just double check that y'all are all on the calendar invite. So if you are able to participate on that day, will have the link that you need to do so very easily.
And for the board members who haven't been able to participate to date, each one of those meetings are set up over a different category, a different area. So you might want to look at those and before joining in the meetings. But I do encourage you to join in there. Again, I appreciate the department having these working group meetings and providing the opportunity for us to input.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Any other questions before we move on?
We're having a good, rich discussion today. I appreciate it.
Go ahead, Ms. Crawford.
I'm going to click through a couple of slides, and we've talked a little bit about this thus far, so I might go a little bit quicker so we can get to kind of what we've heard in public comment. But just a brief overview of the engagement opportunities that have happened thus far. I know several of you attended a town hall. Thank you for coming out. We really did go on the road, and we're road warriors for a few weeks. But this is the 10 public town halls that I was referencing, one for each core region, plus an additional in Memphis and in Nashville. I'm very excited that many of those were incredibly well attended. We got very rich comment from a variety of stakeholders at every step along the way. This is the slide that we showed them, one of the slides that we showed them at the town hall, and really we're trying to give some ideas about the kind of things that have been thought about, talked about in this work prior to our implementation this year. You can see we've got little red icons over here that were kind of intended to indicate to the public what was required. Things that have come up in conversation before have the blue icons. We really wanted to make sure that we indicated to folks at the town hall that this list was not complete, comprehensive of what could be in terms of a calculation ahead of implementation. And so we heard some really poignant comments about some of the things that you see on this slide. And we heard a lot of stuff that's not on this slide at all, and kind of newer considerations that have come to the floor. And so this is just kind of to give you all a sense of how we structured those conversations and kind of gave some information for any member of the public to be able to latch on to and contribute from there. We provided some prompts. Let me see if this, there we go. We provided some prompts along the way at those town halls, really just kind of questions to get folks thinking, to kind of tee up their perspective and input, and really wanted to make sure that they were able to kind of think about what are the things that should or could be included. If we can only measure a few things that we know are really, really important, how do we prioritize amongst those? So this is an example of some of the prompts. And then this was the actual call for additional feedback that we put up at each of the town halls. And I included this here in our deck today because I think one of the things I was really excited to see is that there were folks who came to a town hall who maybe didn't have as much awareness of this issue, who then followed up with us once, twice, maybe 3 times in terms of an email. And so folks were really able to kind of get into the conversation. And once, there was a lot more awareness that the conversation was happening, I think we got rich and good feedback along the way. So what did we hear? At this point in time, we're going to spend a little bit of conversation around the public comment received. I'll also go ahead and let you all know that the public comment has been posted publicly. It's continuing to be posted as additional emails roll in. We got a question yesterday about when will the public comment period end, and I made sure to assure our working group members that we do not want to necessarily cut off the opportunity for the public to continue to inform the discussion as the working group deliberates and kind of considers the key questions that lie ahead of us. As we move through those conversations, those working group meetings are public, the materials are public. So if there are constituents, for example, of your areas in the state board who want to engage, they'll continue to be added to the public comment roster and shared broadly with folks all across the state. So when we think about what we've heard thus far, we kind of had 3 key buckets or kind of themes of the public comment. And first and foremost was ways to think about performance in a school. We're going to dive deeply into what those bullet points actually mean. But it was ways to think about performance. We heard lots of public comment encouraging us to consider how to communicate the letter grade. Assertions that this will and can be a very powerful communication tool. How are you going to ensure that folks understand what it is not, what it includes, what it does not include, what that means, and where any stakeholder could kind of pick up the baton and go from there. And then the third bucket we really heard a lot about is those other indicators. And I mentioned at when we were doing kind of the legal overview, the law requires achievement, the law requires growth, and we've got a lot of flexibility in determining an other indicator if so determined that should or could be included in the calculation. And so we got a lot of specific examples, but public comment generally has fallen kind of into those 3 buckets. So first, ways to think about performance. We're looking at the orange column on the slide. Achievement, one of the required components that the law lays out, says must be included in the calculation. We heard a lot of good input as it relates to that. Of course, we heard folks who said, absolutely, academic achievement is a critical indicator that should be included. Proficiency matters. We want to make sure that we have an understanding of how students are progressing towards the meeting expectations on an academic standard in a particular subject matter area, and really heard calls to be sure to include that kind of measure, which we know we will do because the law requires it. We heard a lot about growth. Indicating how important of a measure of performance that is, ensuring that would be a part of the calculation, which it will be because the law requires it. But it's kind of that notion of, no matter where a student may come in at the beginning of a school year, whether they are achieving excellently, they are just meeting expectations, they are not where we want them to be, that the school performance and impact over a school year in terms of growing a student be included in the calculation. We also heard a lot of cry or concern about whether growth would be removed from consideration in this calculation. I will make sure to say on this call, kind of for the record, that's not possible. It's required in law, and even if it was possible to remove growth, that I don't think is the way that we would want to go. We want to make sure that we're recognizing accomplishments, and we want to recognize accomplishments in academic achievement, proficiency. We want to recognize accomplishments in growth as well. When we look at the 4 additional bullet points kind of in that orange column on the left-hand side, we heard some nuance about ways to think about performance that applied both to achievement and growth and potentially other indicators. And it was notions of performance in subgroups of students or kind of subpopulations. When you see the bullet point that says performance in subgroups, we mean literally the types of subgroups that you all are used to hearing about. When we think about racial subgroups, economically disadvantaged students, English learners, students with disabilities, they actually wanted to look at those kind of formalized subgroups and see how performance looked there. Different from that, we heard about a notion of kind of a subpopulation of students that is just the lowest performing students in the school, no matter what subgroup they may belong to. If they are in the lowest performing band of our students, could or should we include kind of a recognition within the calculation when a school is able to move their lowest performing students to proficiency or grow them significantly? The comments were essentially asking whether that should be a way to recognize those accomplishments when we look at the bottom performing students, despite kind of the formalized subgroups that we talk about with you all very frequently. We heard about the notion of cohorts of students, and we heard about trends over time. So when you think, and you saw the bullet points of the law laid out, you think about kind of our historic and typical ways that we think about accountability at the state or federal level. You look at a year of data, and we had actual comment that came in that said maybe we follow a cohort of students. You start in this grade and you move through your educational journey. Could or should the letter grade system actually track based on the cohort, not just based on the students in that school last year? And slightly differently from the cohorting concept, we heard about trends over time. And so actually looking at a few consecutive years of data to determine a metric for achievement, to determine a metric for growth and those other indicators, as opposed to 1 year of data about students who were in the school building last year. So lots of comment about kind of ways to think about or account for performance within the calculation in the letter grade rating system. We're going to move now to the second column, that blue column in the middle, communicating the letter grade. We heard lots of comment about the impact that this law will have when we actually produce letter grades and assign those on, the state report card to an individual school. The community around that school, the schoolhouse community itself, will be aware of that letter grade rating system, and it will have impacts. In some, comment we heard about consequences. And so there was a lot of, I would say, advice and counsel, kind of cautions, encouragements to really carefully consider the way that we are communicating, being clear in the way that we are communicating. So first and foremost, you see that we heard from the public, it's challenging to capture everything a school could do in a school year to impact student performance in one letter grade. Folks recognized that was challenging, and so we needed to be judicious about the types of things that would go into a calculation to ensure that it would be an understandable metric. It's not simply kind of including a laundry list of indicators, and that goes kind of to the next bullet point. We heard comments saying, please keep the calculation simple. Instead of including many indicators, include only what is most important, what the law requires, and what Tennesseans have determined is kind of most important in terms of a metric that could be represented by a letter grade. We heard lots of comments about the importance of making this rating, as well as the reporting displays that contain the rating, understandable to parents and families. So kind of to the notion of parents already having expectation of an A or a B, C, D, F type of performance. We also got comment about the importance and tips or suggestions about how to present that information on the report card, actually within the web page. Language to use, language to not use, types of graphs or charts that could be helpful, deeper drill downs of data that could be helpful for a parent or family to kind of really understand all that is comprised within that letter grade system. but to make sure the language is parent and family friendly. When we think about kind of developing the report card and the vendors that we contract with the state to be able to get that website done, we've really wanted to be intentional to ensure that the language that we're using, the descriptor text, all of that good stuff on the state report card is not something that is opaque to families, confusing to families. We want to be as straightforward as we can there. And I think, when we think we're being parent friendly, sometimes it doesn't go quite far enough. And so we're really trying to push ourselves in this kind of development stage to make sure that when we do produce letter grades, that information is going to be clear and understandable for parents and families. Last couple of bullet points. There's a comment here about report and display alongside the letter grade. That is suggestions of how we put information forward on the report card. We heard, including letter grades and kind of big, bold font or not, putting them at the top of the page or the bottom of the page, putting drill down capabilities to kind of see behind the letter grade, see the components behind the letter grade or not. There was lots of conversation about that. And I will say, I think particularly from our school and district leaders, we've heard about the challenge of a letter grade system conveying everything that a school could be doing in a school year to impact student performance. And so if we are tasked by state law to develop that letter grade based on a calculation that will measure a few component indicators, is there a way that the department could work intentionally to provide additional contextual information around the publication of that letter grade to kind of help tell a fuller or broader picture of what's happening in a school in a particular school year? The last bullet point in terms of communicating the letter grade was really just kind of a reminder, I think, for our agency and for all who are thinking about developing this calculation, that what is going to be measured will be the focus. And I think our school and district communities have been particularly vocal about that component, wanting to make sure that parents and families understand exactly what the calculation will include, will represent, versus what is not included or represented in the calculation. They've really kind of tried to make sure that we consider that as we move forward when we think about kind of the total process or approach for communicating the letter grade, the components, and what that means. I'm going to go now to the green column on the right, other indicators. This is kind of the third point in the law where we've got a little bit more flexibility to decide whether or not to include additional things that matter to Tennesseans alongside those required components of achievement and growth. We heard a lot of good stuff when it comes to the other indicators column. First and foremost, you see elementary, middle, and high school. What that means to communicate is really kind of a differentiation of a calculation meant for elementary school students, middle school students, high school students. We heard a lot of comment about how we're working in an elementary school space with our littlest, youngest learners, kind of getting them the foundations they need to be able to learn for the rest of their academic career. That work looks really different than the work that we're doing, for example, in a high school space where kids are about to graduate and kind of go out into the world to take on a career or a college pathway, post-secondary pathway, military pathway. And the work looks different in that high school space. And so there was comment about differentiating a calculation for elementary, middle, or high school. We have talked about this actually with some of our district leaders and school leaders, and I'll kind of update a little bit on some of the feedback they provided as it relates to this bullet point. When you look at schools across the state, they are wonderfully diverse in the way that we operate, the students we serve. You may see schools that have K through 8 students in the same kind of schoolhouse community. At that point in time, if we did have a calculation that was different between an elementary, middle, or a high school, but the law requires us to generate a letter grade per school, when you have a K through 8 school, kind of where does middle school begin? Where does elementary end? Similarly, if you look at a 6th to 12th grade school, for example, where does middle school end and where does high school begin? And so we heard some pretty poignant comments, I think, back from our school and district leaders as it relates to different calculations for different grade bands, that perhaps the best way to go about it is kind of an elementary early grades calculation versus a secondary calculation. But the notion and kind of public comment comment has been that there may need to be different calculations or an expanded calculation to account for the differences in work and focus between what we're doing with our youngest students and our older students. Second bullet point, third bullet point, and fourth bullet point kind of go together. We heard about chronic absenteeism, which was a component that was included in the original calculation, and heard some pain points perhaps that could be associated with that when it would be included in a letter grade system. So when we think about chronic absenteeism that accounts for absences that are excused or unexcused, the comment was that schools can't necessarily control for absences of students who may have significant medical need or illness, as an example. And so there were comments about if we are going to look at an absenteeism type indicator in this calculation, maybe we just count, the kind of unexcused absence or the excused absent versus both of those types of absences. As an update to that, we have heard some feedback that perhaps chronic absenteeism is not appropriate as an indicator at all in the calculation. Maybe that just doesn't make sense to include. And so there was comment kind of about that absenteeism concept and whether or not, what part and whether or not that should be included in the calculation moving forward. On the flip side, we heard about indicators that may be available to us that could indicate positive, healthy kind of school climate or experience, and that's the notion of student attendance and teacher retention. There were comments about, when schools seem to be serving students in the ways that parents might expect, students will come. They will show up day after day. Teachers will return year after year. And so the comment that we heard was, are there these kind of indicators of positive school impact that could be included as maybe a replacement for a concept that's maybe the negative look at it, which is that chronic absenteeism perspective. Now we're going to get into a couple other bullet points, post-secondary readiness and academics. We heard lots and lots of good stuff in both of these categories, and I'm going to start with post-secondary readiness. And it really kind of harkens to that first bullet point about elementary, middle, and high school and whether a calculation should look different between young students and older students. We as a state have invested a lot of time, money, resource, interest to ensure that our students in middle and high school are getting ready to go out into the world and be successful no matter what path they want to pursue after they walk across the stage at high school graduation. And if we are intentionally investing in them and in our schools to that outcome, to achieve that outcome, could or should those kind of programs be represented in the calculation? So you see up here career exploration as an example. We heard comment particularly in that middle school category, in that middle school age group, if there are schools that are providing effective or unique career exploration for students earlier and earlier, could that be recognized in a letter grade system? Our second kind of sub-bullet point, you see some very specific things that were called out. This is not an exhaustive list, but a lot of the programs that we know students are taking part in, like CTE, that career and technical education, AP coursework, those advanced coursework opportunities like AP classes or IB classes, for example, dual enrollment that allows students who are in high school to be able to generate a college earning credit-bearing course in their K-12 education. JROTC, kind of military pathways. There were a lot of specific programs that were called out by Tennesseans who said, this is an important program. It matters to me. This could or should be included in the calculation very specifically. The final sub-bullet point on post-secondary readiness relates to graduation rate. We heard how important it is that our students actually graduate from their K-12 education in a way that is indicating that they've kind of achieved what they needed to and are ready for the world. And you all well know that we've had some conversations back and forth with the federal government that have led essentially to a different type of federal calculation of a graduation rate than what is called for in state law. Our comments, kind of more specifically than how important graduation is and could or should that be included in the calculation, I think specifically indicated that the state-based graduation rate may be preferred over the federal graduation rate if it were to be included in the calculation. We're going to move now into academics and supports. So we think about English language arts and mathematics a lot when we think about accountability and rating systems like this. There were comment that came in from Tennesseans that said, you know, we put a lot of other opportunities in front of our students. We care about other subject matter areas like social studies or science. If we are providing those intentionally to students, if we are investing in them and ensuring success in those subject matter areas, why would we not include those areas in a calculation for a letter grade? We heard about some of the kind of newer focus areas of our state as it relates to student academic supports that go beyond class, just kind of regular tier 1 instruction and classroom time, to the learning acceleration and remediation strategies that we've especially invested in the last few years. We've talked a lot about that critical 3rd grade milestone for reading and proficient reading skills. Strong reading skills by the time you hit 3rd grade is a really key indicator of how successful you may be able to be in the rest of your K-12 education and beyond that. And so the comment was essentially, if we are investing so intentionally to ensure our earlier grades are really focusing on those reading skills and that kind of early literacy space, could or should that be carried forward in this calculation? You know, when we think about some of the pathways for support for some students who may not yet be proficient in that 3rd grade milestone, like summer camp, tutoring as examples, we heard some comments about whether those things could be, you know, a school performance and those types of programs could or should be included in a calculation. And then we heard about some of the maybe intervention type strategies that exist within a school day and have existed within a school day for a number of years in Tennessee, such as RTI. When a school is seeing wonderful success from an RTI approach, could or should that be included in the calculation? So this has been a very long overview of what we have heard in public comment thus far, but really wanted to make sure to kind of give you some of the granularity there, but also call out kind of those key buckets or themes that have come through in the comment.
Before you go on, Ms. Crawford, I'm sure there's probably questions and comments, and thank you for this. And I have a very basic process question to ask. Obviously, you've received hundreds and probably thousands of comments, which are great, and I'm really glad of the process. How do you go decide which ones you're going to use? What's the process for making the decision? And I'll give you a couple of examples. I know for a fact that I've heard numerous comments, all that say growth ought to be a part of it. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and obviously growth has to be a part of it. How do you first measure growth? And then on these other things, how do you decide, well, okay, I'm going to use this one. I'm going to use this category. I'm not going to use this category. Have you done like a Pareto chart to say that 80% of the comments came in? I'm an engineer. Give me a break. But 80% of the comments came and are looking for this. These are important, et cetera. What's the process for how you're going to decide which ones you're going to use? And then when you go through them, how are you going to measure those?
So really, really good question. I'm actually going to flip back to the requirements of the law just for a moment, because there are some prescriptive things that we see here as it relates to academic achievement and growth. It points out an or. I will point out for us an or. But the other comment I will make as you're kind of reading through this again is when we think about measures and metrics and data, we've heard our commissioner say many times that these components need to be valid, comparable, reliable. We want to make sure that over time that these components, these subcomponents kind of stand the test of time, that they are representing what we believe them to be representing, that they are kind of replicable from year to year. And of course that the data is as rock solid as it possibly can be. And so kind of in the area of academic achievement, the law calls out specifically that we will use the TCAP measure or an end of course exam for those older students to measure academic achievement. In the growth component, it talks about TVOS or data from other measures of student growth. I think when we think about growth in Tennessee, by and large, most folks kind of go to that TVOS kind of measure in their mind. Now, to get back to your question about how do you decide what to keep and what to throw out, what makes the cut and what falls off the list, that's where we've really wanted to say we are not going to make that call by ourselves. We are going to inform other Tennesseans who care about this, who have a specific perspective or vantage point that matters, while reminding all of our stakeholders that the primary intended audience for these letter grades is our families and our parents. And so we're really looking for additional engagement and input from stakeholders who represent a variety of perspectives and communities and priorities and preferences to help us determine, with support of modeling and kind of resource, what is it that should fall off versus should make the cut in terms of academic achievement, growth, and those other indicator areas. As a quick example, I'll talk through, I did a presentation just on the A through F letter grade update recently to a group of district and school staff who really focus on data and attendance, right? Every day they come to work and they're worried about data and attendance of students and how that data is kind of flowing up to the state for inclusion in rating systems or performance kind of measures. Those folks really liked the idea that people around the state have said maybe chronic absenteeism shouldn't be included. And so, you can kind of see when you talk about this and engage about this broadly, you do begin to see some kind of consensus points amongst stakeholder groups. But we know that not everyone is going to agree on all of these topics. And so that's really what the working group is going to do. We're going to provide hopefully very intentional, kind of targeted prompts to help drive some of that consensus building, be able to identify where we do have consensus versus where we don't. But at the end of the day, the law charges the department to kind of be the owners of the calculation, but we do not want to do that in a vacuum. We want to do that engaging broadly with Tennesseans who we know that this is really important to.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but basically you are going to look to see areas where there are consensus and consider those. And then with regard to we've had a couple of questions already on the formulas, on the weighting. How is that process determined? Is that again from consensus, or do you have thoughts on that, or how? I'm just trying to understand the process for people.
Yes, sir. So I think that's probably where some of the data modeling will come in. I mean, I think it's hard to understand theoretically when we talk about an indicator, how that might play through in a calculation without seeing some of the math impacts. And so I do think that, when we're able to kind of provide best models of other states that our working group members may request of us, or modeling that they request of us, that'll make it a little bit more tangible for folks. We know we've got some boundaries within what the law requires, but we also want to make sure that we're able to validate that what you believe in theory, when we actually kind of run the numbers and do the math, would play out in the calculation as well. So I think that's where you're going to see the modeling be a particularly helpful resource towards generating consensus or identifying those areas where there is not consensus.
Do you have any guiding principles on how the model is going to be developed that you can share with us, or?
Yeah, I mean, we think about the sequencing of conversations in the working groups. I mentioned yesterday we all said hello to each other and got to know each other, and we said, what are we here to do together? But next week, we're going to have a session that goes deep on academic achievement. And as an example, we can talk about, when you look up here, particularly in the academic supports bucket, do we want to include other subjects or not? If we do, how do we kind of prioritize amongst the subjects that would be included in an academic achievement indicator? Just as in theory, kind of hypothetically, we could do modeling on those types of options, right? So I think we want to be very conscientious in our approach towards helping the steering committee identify what their preference is and kind of come to consensus or decide they cannot. But I think we will look, and we're talking internally about this just yesterday, about the need for us to be very able to quickly turn around some modeling, to turn that back to working group members and say, this is how it actually plays out. Is that what you expected? Do we still agree with what we thought before? Yes or no? And then kind of move through the logic at that point.
Good. So when you do that, will you share the model with the working group, or just the results?
Yeah, I think we want to be really transparent about that. You can believe my words, but if you see the modeling yourself, I think you would be much more convinced on what you would prioritize as an individual working group member. And so we want to be real transparent about that. There are going to be, of course, we've got capacity kind of allocated for this. And so we're expecting that to be a request and a need for the working group members, and are kind of ready to go when that is needed to be done.
Thank you. Let me ask if the other board members have questions. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, Ryan
Yeah,
Holt.
Mr. Holt.
Ms. Crawford, you may have answered this before. I apologize if you did, but I just wanted to confirm that once the formula has been developed, whether it's a near final, I guess ideally a near final, that's going to be presented to the state board. Is that the department's plan at this point?
Yes, I mean, we will definitely bring you all the calculation and the letter grades for review, but we're going to take it broader than that. We want it to be a very transparent process every step of the way through. And when we were on that ribbon slide, there was kind of that number 4 step, which is publication of the calculation itself, and then publication of the letter grades. You are probably well familiar with the types of resources we put out to districts, such as an accountability protocol. That is a very dense technical document that I'm sure you read in your free time all the time. But that's the type of resource that we want to be able to provide. This will be a much more streamlined type of rating system and math equation. But there needs to be great transparency, I think, for everyone in this process on what exactly is measured, how is it measured, how is it weighted, and how does that kind of the data flow through to generate those letter grade systems. So yes, sir, we will be happy to bring the kind of results of this process back to the board for review. But we want to be broad and really be public about that, so that everybody kind of understands what we have created and where we're going from here.
That's great. I think we all share that same interest of transparency, being inclusive, and from everything you've described, I know you all have been working very hard to do that throughout the process. And just to confirm, it's a before implementation. You all will be presenting it to the state board before implementation.
Yes, the letter.
Formula?
Yes, that's exactly right. Okay. And we'll publish the calculation. I mentioned that the working groups conclude on October 20th. You all have that board meeting right around the beginning of November. That is a period of time when we're beginning to do all of the back end website work and some of the data kind of moving into a website in terms of visualizations. The letter grades will be published towards the end of the month in November. So that's kind of the sequencing of what you can expect to see there.
I mean, you won't see the actual, at the state board meeting, you won't have the list. We will not have here, because that will be an embargoed period for school districts to check their data, all those sorts of things. So by the third and fourth, or whatever, I think it's the fourth, the third, right, and fourth, I think that the state board meeting is. We won't be able to hand you a list of the actual. We can show you the calculation by that point, but we won't be able to show you where districts land until the end of the month, because we will be we'll be in an embargoed period so districts can see their data. We can make sure the data is clean, all those things. So I just want to make sure that's real clear.
I understand that. I think that is clear. Let me ask this question, though.
Okay.
So when you bring it on the 3rd, you said you can show us the model, how it's done, which is really good. My question is, if there's something that we see at that point in time that just kind of looks odd to us, is that too late to impact at that point in time, or can we still impact on the 3rd of November?
I mean,
yes, sir. I'm happy to answer that question. I think, when we bring it for you for review, this is going to be the working group kind of process to develop the calculation will be kind of the end of the road for implementation this year as it relates to changes in the calculation. And there's a reason for that, which is the time it takes for us to actually move this into the report card, kind of develop the data, move it into the report card, and importantly, give our districts and schools that heads up period that they're used to having before things like this get published. We regularly do preview windows for districts to be able to see, this information is going to go out publicly, and I've got 10 days or so to go in there and check it, get familiar with it, plan. And so it would be kind of the end of the process for this year. Now, the other thing I will say is we are all joining, I think, together in the spirit of continuous improvement here. And if there are some shifts or adjustments that we would want to make as a state between A through F year 1 and A through F year 2, we would certainly look for folks to provide feedback in that way.
And we're definitely going to engage, just real quick, Bob, we are going to also definitely engage with some of our research partners to really track and help us understand the implementation as it goes through the process. You know, are the resources being directed in the ways they need to be directed? What is the impact, you know, on the campuses themselves? You know, are we seeing issues with retention? Like, we want to be able to also work with our research partner to really identify, like, okay, how is this implementation going? So as Chelsea said, we are in the spirit of continuous improvement to continue to see how this impacts the field, how it impacts schools, and how we can do a better job in partnership to continue to focus resources and supports for districts.
Again, I think we really appreciate the engagement and the opportunity to impact on this. I'm just trying to understand, not only for other board members, but for other people, at what point in time, you know, we engage in the working groups. Working groups will provide information. You're going to take that, you're going to massage that, you're going to develop a model from that based on what you hear, looking at consensus or whatever it is. And then that model, then will there be, once that model is developed, it's done for the year.
Correct.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
So the time for us to impact is now as part of the working groups, time for other people. But we may not see the model until after it's done. So the how the weights are used to develop in the model, we, the board, or the other working group or their constituent might not see that until it's cast in stone. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And I'll talk to that a little bit because it kind of comes together in the 5th meeting of the working group. That's where all the weighting is going to be talked about and kind of prioritization. And we were getting ready and thinking about how we're going to kind of structure the working groups to use that very precious time as effectively as we can. We said it is an impossibility for us to talk about this and say, thanks, guys, and kind of go away and then come back later with letter grades. And so I think you will see kind of on the heels of the working group communication back out at the end of that prioritization meeting, even on what we have heard today and kind of what our next steps are. And, you know, I think it's also probably a good reminder for us to do some communication to the working group ahead of the calculation going public, just so that they all have, all of the working group members have the benefit of understanding what has been kind of the ultimate product of their work before it is publicized for the rest of the state.
I think Ms. McInturf was trying to get in. Did you have a question, Chrissy?
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to tell you all how thankful I was. This has been amazing. I mean, the whole transparency and really working to make sure that parents understand the letter grades and just really working hard to make sure it's easy to follow, even for teachers and, you know, for everybody in the whole community, not just for educators, and just listening when you all were talking about either, you know, the chronic absenteeism, and it does like that. There are schools that have been left off the reward school list because of excused absences, and, you know, that's really hard to change that if you've got medical excuses. So I just wanted to say I appreciate you all listening and taking that into consideration. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I know all of us at the agency appreciate that compliment. And it's very important, I think, for us to be able to do engagement authentically. We really mean it when we say we want to engage, and we really want to listen. And you know, when you all say left, we don't want to go right without a very, very good reason to. And if there is a very good reason, you'll know what that reason is. So I appreciate that. It's a challenging thing to implement, but we understand what the intent and the charge is here, and we want to do that collaboratively.
Thank you.
Mr.
Any
Chairman?
other questions? Yes, Mr. Hull.
I don't want to belabor the point of timing at all. And I say this also in the spirit of knowing and believing that you all have been very inclusive in this process. We have the ability on the state board, as do I think anyone, to participate in these working groups, which is a wonderful thing. I have been told by Angie Sanders that the law requires us as a state board to review the grading scale before implementation. And so I only raise that now to make sure that we're all comfortable that, I know going back to the spring, you know, we had an issue that it really became sort of like a legal technical issue on adequate growth and whether we were able to approve it at a meeting, and then we kind of got up towards the last minute. So I don't know if we're all comfortable on where that is. And Angie, if you want to speak to that.
I'd like to hear Ms. Sanders comment on that. Thank you, Ryan.
Sure. Angie Sanders, General Counsel for the board. So as Mr. Holt mentioned, the law requires that prior to implementation, the board review the grading scale developed by the department. That is not approval of the grading scale. And so essentially that would be a report item. I presume it sounds like we are discussing that coming at the November meeting, but there would be no approval aspect. It's just approval, but it is required by law to happen before the scale or the system is implemented.
And I would think that review, like say, we don't have approval, but review would mean that we would have an opportunity for, again, meaningful comment and contact to be considered. One thing, I don't know if this is a possibility or not, but I understand you can't give us the grades. They go to the districts for their evaluation, but could you provide some kind of a sample, take the names off the list and give us a fair sample to kind of see how this thing shakes out and where it's shaking out by that November date? That'd be possible.
Yes, sir. I mean, I think we'll want to be as transparent as we can with you all about what to expect. And some of that actually may be a little bit knowable, for example, kind of in the modeling process, right? Like when we see how some of the data flows through in the working group step of this implementation. We do provide that district preview window to ensure that the district leaders and the school leaders can go look at the report card and kind of prepare themselves. I also made a comment earlier on this meeting that I think our agency wants to ensure that you all as board members have the things that you need so that, on the day that we kind of turn live the state report card, you are ready to react, respond, field questions from constituents and so on and so forth. So I'd like to maybe have additional conversations with you all about what could be super helpful there, even in terms of FAQs, for example, on kind of the common questions that you might receive and some of the answers to those questions about process or kind of what is the calculation, what is not the calculation. So I think we'll want to be very collaborative in that step.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the point that Ms. Sanders was just making too, is that if we have a responsibility to review it, then I think we need to have the time to be able to dig into it and understand it and make some meaningful comments and questions.
Yes, sir. And I am certainly not a lawyer. Our general counsel, Christy Fowler, is very well respected and very light years ahead of me in terms of legal. I know we looked at that part of the code that requires preview and kind of review of the state board ahead of implementation in the 17-18 school year. So we'll take that note down as well.
Thank you.
I mean, the goal is to have a calculation that you can just understand. So I mean, we just had a statement about AMOs, like how do you put that in people speak, right? I mean, so the goal again with this calculation is going to be like, here's how much achievement counts, here's how much growth accounts, and here's how much any other indicators that these steering committees decided were important enough to be in this big A calculation into the thing. So I think, again, yes, it'll be a review, but and obviously absolutely open for input, but I think, if the concern is that there's going to be some weird little thing that, that requires, us to refer to 10 different statutes to be able to understand how it's implemented, that's the goal, is that it'll be very clear to y'all how the steering committees decided this. And then we can work between the staff to try to figure out what's the best way in a public setting, during the state board meeting to be able to present and share with the public, all while knowing that we still need to respect and support our districts and their data so that we can make sure that we don't publish something that is wrong. So I just this is a little caveat, I know, but I just want to make sure that we're, that makes some sense.
I think, again, we appreciate the transparency. I think the concern I hear out there is, we're not going to know the way it's done, and all of a sudden a grade will come out and we don't clearly understand why, or, we provided all this input and comment, and consistency says this should be in there, and, there's, here and this shouldn't be, and then all of a sudden over here was used. People just want to understand. I mean, this obviously is an important factor. Our goal obviously is to be able to have parents, decide, hey, this is where, this is a great school, or this is a school that needs improvement in this area. And I think, the subgroups, is really, really important, as opposed to, I know we have to give one overall score, but, if I know a school is growing, then that means a lot to me, as opposed to if I know a school just has a grade and I don't know what's growing. If I know the performance in subgroups, so this subgroup is doing well in this area, and I'm moving into that area, I'll say, hey, that school does really well in this subgroup that my child is in. I want to go to that school. So I think the more information we can give, the better off we are.
Yep. Yes, I think y'all will be really pleasantly surprised too with the development of the report card that Chelsea and her team are working on, because that is the goal. And that was one of the exercises. I know some of you were there during our conversations with superintendents, to really come out with a report card that is meaningful, not only to parents, but also to them, as I mentioned before, to their school board, so that they can be partners in identifying those supports that they need in those areas that are showing up not so hot, right? Or, again, you have your achievement and you have your growth, and then also being able to determine, like, okay, growth is good, but, at some point, kids need to be on grade level,
right,
if they're going to be successful in life. Absolutely. And so we all have to go into these conversations knowing that, we can grow a kid that's been way behind and they're a senior, but they're still at a 10th grade reading level or math level. That's not going to translate in success after post-secondary. I mean, in their post-secondary or after high school. So we also have to be realistic about how we really celebrate growth, in the fact that it's got to at some point lead to achievement on grade level, because we want our kids to be successful once they leave our system.
Agree. Good. Thank you.
All right, I've got just a couple slides left, and information we've talked a lot about already, so I will just flip us through to the next steps. We talked about working groups. They are happening now. We have had one meeting. We have 4 more. Last meeting of the working group will be on October 20th. The sequence of the conversations there, which will begin on Tuesday, in terms of the meetings 2, 3, 4, and 5, will go in this order: academic achievement, growth, other indicators, and then kind of putting it all together, which is the weighting and prioritization of the decisions that we've made in those other 3 conversations. We want to be very transparent, as we've talked about, and so all of those meetings are going to be recorded and posted publicly. The iterations of the conversation will be something that all of the state could follow along with if they want to, and of course we'll post all of the PowerPoint materials and other resources that may come along with those individual conversations. That will be the determination of the calculation. At that point, we take that information and we kind of go into our deep dark hole here in the agency to work with our vendor on the state report card website. All of that kind of data transfer, checking in preparation for a district preview window that will be provided ahead of full publication and publishing of the letter grades themselves. I mentioned that we are really thinking intentionally about what we can do as an agency or others could do to kind of come alongside our district and school leaders and support them as this information is rolled out and this law is implemented for the first time. And so we've already started having really good conversations, specifically with our directors of schools, but also with some principals and some teachers as well, who have kind of talked about the types of things that they will wonder or want to know, the types of things they may be asked and would want to be able to respond to. And so we're kind of thinking real strategically about communications type supports for our kind of key stakeholders, like our district leaders and our school leaders and our teachers. What resources, one-pagers, FAQs can we provide to really the entire ecosystem here to ensure that people are able to understand very clearly what this is, what it is not, what it means, what it doesn't, kind of what the next steps are. We've heard that there are a few groups in particular that folks want us to try to focus on there, first and foremost being parents and families, as well as teachers and school staff, those building leaders and our principals, local elected officials, and that has included reference to the school boards and the county commissions and the city councils of the world, as well as the state level representatives and senators. So we're really thinking about how to kind of prepare folks in this environment to be able to talk about these letter grades after they are published, answer questions well, accurately, and provide good information. The other piece that we're really thinking through is how can our department's core offices and our core staff in places all across the state come together with data folks at our schools or our districts to kind of help ensure some of those very specific granular questions that may then arise from a school board member or a county commissioner or a senator or representative. Can we ensure that those data folks are ready to kind of address the questions that they may receive, provide insights based on their school, comparison type information? And so we're thinking intentionally about how our core offices could be mobilized and operationalized in support of that kind of communication exercise that we know that this will lead to. Final steps in the process are the key releases. So we've got the working groups that are happening now through mid to late October. On the heels of that will be kind of publication of the calculation itself. And then, of course, the letter grades will go live in November after districts have their preview window and kind of can review what their letter grades are, how it's going to look on the report card, and prepare their communications at the local level. And that is the last slide that I have on this presentation. So I know I've talked with you all and at you all a lot today, but it is really, really important topic. I know you all care a lot about it, as do we. And so I just want to close, again, thanking you all for the opportunity to come and talk about this and kind of give you an update and status report along the way.
We appreciate it very much, Chelsea. And let me ask if other board members have any questions.
Chairman, this is Sarah. I'm not a board member, so I'll wait and see if there's any members who have questions before jumping in. But I have one last question.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Morrison.
Well, first, Chelsea, thank you for the generous overview. Again, I was part of that call yesterday, so I heard a lot of this, but appreciate you sharing with members who were not on that call. And just for the record and for those who are watching, could you give us a little bit better sense of who is on that working group? Because again, there were a lot of folks. I think you said like up to 50. But just give us a little bit more detail in terms of who's involved in those conversations coming up. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. And we're actually going to do a press release kind of naming all the individuals. And we went around in the meeting at the top of the meeting yesterday, just introducing ourselves to each other. And so you're welcome to go watch that at any point in time. It's posted on our department YouTube page right now. But essentially, it's kind of it was intended to be a diverse mix of folks, and I mean diverse in terms of geographic location and kind of representation, diverse in terms of the stakeholder role or perspective that might be brought to the table, and diverse in all the ways that we think about in terms of gender and race and age and all of those good things. And so what you will see in that mix of folks who have accepted the invitation to be a part of the working group, it's our directors of schools, it is teachers, it is principals. There are some charter school leaders in there in particular. We have, of course, our state board represented in the working group. The Tennessee General Assembly is represented in the working group. And then there's a series of kind of advocate organizations that have come to the table, research organizations that have come to the table. We've got some local elected officials, like a board member actually sits on the working group. And I would be remiss if I did not include the very, very important stakeholder group there, which is our parents. We've got a lot of folks who luckily get to wear both hats a little bit. You know, you might be a mama or a daddy, as well as kind of bring a different stakeholder perspective. But we tried to be very intentional to be representative of the many stakeholders who have kind of come forward in these conversations and asked to be included or have their kind of voice represented by someone. The other thing I will say, you know, and we did this at the beginning of the meeting yesterday, we said we want you to bring your stakeholder perspective, no matter what that perspective is and kind of what your day-to-day focus might be. But we also want everyone to kind of push themselves to consider the parent and family perspective. Even if you may not have children and you're serving on that working group, kind of think about, put yourself in the shoes of a parent or a family member who is attempting to learn about education in their community and how they can support their individual student, how they can support their local schools. And so it's been, I think, a good group so far. We do have a lot of folks around the table, and that's I think, a good problem to have, because we know that this matters to a lot of folks all across the state. So keep an eye on the press release, but that will name kind of the individuals who are showing up there. But that's an overview of the mix of folks who have been invited to participate. Yes.
You're muted, Dr. Morrison. I don't know if you had another comment.
I was just
not.
saying thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, because again, I saw it, but I wanted others who are watching to also get a sense.
Thank you very much. Good point.
Any other questions for Chelsea or for the TDOE? Again, let me thank you all for the transparency. Obviously, this process has gone through the various working study committee meetings and working groups, and continues to go through. And it is a very important subject, obviously, that's of interest to every stakeholder in the state of Tennessee. So that's doing it transparently is a great way to do it. Encourage all the board members to participate in the working groups. That is our real opportunity, I think, to input right now. We look forward to the meeting in November, and anything that you can give us ahead of time before that would be greatly appreciated. Any other comments or questions on this subject? Any other final comments, Dr. Morrison, before we adjourn the meeting?
No, I just encourage anyone watching to reach out to board members and others on the working group. I mean, I do think it's a concentrated period where there's going to be some really rich, deep conversations about something that everyone cares a lot about. So just appreciate the chance to talk today, Chelsea, Commissioner Reynolds, and look forward to engaging in more conversations over the next couple of weeks.
Well, if nothing else, we'll call the meeting adjourned. Thank you. Have a great day. See you.
Thank you. Thank you.